I thought I had seen it all when it came to New York's abandoned subway stations. From the stunning City Hall Loop, a hidden gem beneath Manhattan, to the shuttered platforms of Worth Street and 18th Street, and even the incomplete 76th Street station on the 2nd Avenue line, none of them prepared me for what I uncovered beneath Canal Street. It all began with whispers on urban exploration forums, accounts of maintenance crews stumbling across tunnels absent from any maps, and eerie tales of train operators glimpsing phantom platforms in the pitch black stretches between stations. I dismissed these as urban legends until I stumbled upon the blueprints. These were no ordinary documents, they were official MTA plans from 1923, detailing an immense station complex beneath the intersection of Canal and Broadway. Unlike anything I had ever seen, the blueprints bore a peculiar version of the Transit Authority seal, with unnervingly sharp angles, as if someone had attempted to replicate the seal based on a vague description. I'm not just a casual explorer. For over a decade, I've been documenting New York's forgotten subway infrastructure, sharing my findings in underground publications and exclusive forums. My apartment is a shrine to transit history, its walls covered in vintage maps. Through years of networking, I've gained the trust of retired MTA employees who've entrusted me with too strange or obscure to make it into official records. But these blueprints, they were unlike anything I'd ever encountered. As I studied those blueprints, unsettling details began to surface. The station's design featured architectural elements that didn't belong to the 1920s, peculiar angles and spatial arrangements that felt disturbingly unnatural, almost like something out of an escher drawing. In the margins, I discovered faded, handwritten notes. Most were illegible, but one phrase stood out, repeated over and over. The space between spaces. Another smudged note hinted at something called displacement during construction. I spent weeks digging through city records, searching for any trace of the crew that might have worked on this mysterious project. There was nothing, no payroll entries, no accident reports, no evidence the construction had ever happened. Finding the entrance turned out to be alarmingly simple, a broken service door in the Canal Street Jay-Z station, its rusted lock long forgotten. Beyond it lay a narrow maintenance corridor reeking of stagnant water and decay. My headlamp cast a feeble glow into the darkness as I descended the gentle slope, the air growing colder with every step. I had prepared meticulously. Extra batteries, 2 headlamps, a detailed, hand-drawn map of the maintenance corridors, and my trusted analog compass. That compass had never failed me, until now. The moment I shut the service door behind me, the needle spun wildly, as if the rules of physics no longer applied. I should have turned back. Every seasoned explorer knows that when your tools start to fail, it's time to retreat. But curiosity has always been my weakness. The first warning sign came when I pulled out my phone to photograph the entrance. Every picture turned out distorted, overlaid with strange, jagged patterns. In one shot, I glimpsed what appeared to be a figure in the background. I knew I was alone. The figure's clothing was vintage, perhaps a suit from the 1920s, but its proportions were wrong. Its frame was impossibly tall and unnervingly thin. Panicked, I deleted the photos, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light. Now, I wish I hadn't. Those images might have been proof I wasn't imagining what came next. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, the narrow corridor opened into something that defied logic. My flashlight couldn't illuminate the ceiling, nor could it reach the far walls. The space was immense, larger than Grand Central's main concourse, larger than any subway station I had ever explored. Rows upon rows of pristine marble columns extended endlessly into the darkness. They were untouched by time. No grime, no wear, no evidence that nearly a century had passed since their construction. Each step I took echoed endlessly, reverberating from distances that shouldn't exist beneath Manhattan. The platform tiles gleamed as if they had been laid just yesterday, their black and white checkerboard pattern distorting and shifting when I tried to focus on where they disappeared into the void. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They mirrored mine, always maintaining a distance just beyond the edge of visibility. I called out, my voice bouncing back at me in warped, distorted echoes. The footsteps stopped, so did I, and then they resumed, perfectly in sync with my own pace. A wave of unease surged through me as I spun in place, sweeping my headlamp across the forest of columns. But the light seemed to falter, bending and distorting before it could reach whatever was out there. The footsteps multiplied. They were no longer coming from just one direction, but from all around me, encircling me in an unseen cadence. The air grew frigid, the cold pressing against my skin like an oppressive weight. My breath condensed in front of me, a ghostly mist swirling in the beam of my headlamp. Then I saw it, something that made my blood freeze. My shadow wasn't the only thing moving in this impossible station. The tiles themselves seemed alive, shifting whenever I wasn't looking directly at them. The checkerboard pattern changed every time I turned back, as if the black and white squares were rearranging themselves just beyond my field of vision. I tried taking photos to document the changes, but each picture revealed something entirely different from what I had just seen. In one image, the tiles formed a perfect spiral that appeared infinite, its dizzying design making my head ache if I stared too long. I came across a bench, the only piece of furniture in the vast space, and sat down to gather my thoughts. The metal felt like ice through my jeans, and its design was unsettling. Like the blueprints I had studied, the bench incorporated elements that defied logic. Its angles shifted subtly depending on how I looked at it, bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Out of curiosity, I reached out to touch one of these impossible curves. For a moment, my hand seemed to pass through the solid metal. I recoiled in shock as ripples spread across the bench's surface, as though it were made of liquid mercury instead of steel. That's when I saw it, a dark figure slipping behind a column about 50 yards away. My first thought was that I had stumbled upon another urban explorer, or perhaps someone who had made this eerie station their home. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding unnervingly flat and lifeless in the cavernous chamber. I jogged toward the column, my footsteps blending with the disorienting echoes of phantom steps that seemed to follow me. When I reached the spot, there was nothing, only another platform stretching into the endless darkness. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. In my peripheral vision, the shadow was there again, sliding behind a column in the opposite direction. But something was wrong. This time, it was much farther away than anyone could have moved in that short span of time, and its form was unnatural, too tall, its movements too smooth, almost fluid. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but when I opened my eyes, I saw it again, further away this time, as though it were playing an impossible game of hide and seek across distances that shouldn't exist. The station remained eerily devoid of any familiar subway features. No tracks, no third rail, no signal boxes, no advertisements. Just endless platforms that branched and multiplied the deeper I ventured. I tried counting my steps to regain some sense of orientation, but the numbers began to blur in my mind, defying logic. By all reasoning, 100 yards in any direction should have placed me under the East River, in Brooklyn, or somewhere far from Manhattan. Yet the station continued, sprawling endlessly. At what I thought must be the farthest corner of this labyrinth, I discovered something that still haunts my dreams: a lone wooden ticket booth. Its dark, aged wood contrasted sharply with the gleaming brass of the ticket window, which looked as though it had been polished that very day. Behind the glass, I saw an ancient ticketing machine. Its digital display inexplicably showed today's date. But that wasn't what stopped me dead in my tracks. On the counter rested a single subway token, and beside it, my wallet. My heart pounded as I reached back to confirm. My wallet was still in my pocket. Trembling, I picked up the one on the counter and opened it. Inside, Everything was identical to mine, except my driver's license. The license on the counter was unmistakably mine, but the issue date read 1923. Shaking, I picked up the token. It was warm, impossibly so in the freezing air, and seemed to pulse faintly, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Under my headlamp, the usual NYC Transit Authority text was absent. Instead, the token bore symbols I'd never seen before. Shapes that shifted and shimmered as I rotated it, like a living hologram. Without thinking, I pocketed the token. Instantly, all the lights in my pack flickered. The air around me seemed heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. Then I started seeing the symbols everywhere, etched into tiles, scratched into the columns, even reflected in puddles of water that shouldn't have existed in such a dry station. The patterns seemed to shift each time I spotted them, rearranging in ways that made my head throb. One particular formation repeated more often than the others, 7 symbols arranged in a semicircle. I sketched it hastily into my notebook. Later that night, the same strange pattern appeared later on my bathroom mirror, somehow etched into the condensation despite no one having used the shower. A sound echoed through the station then, the distant screech of ancient brakes, followed by the unmistakable whoosh of train doors opening. But there were no tracks here, no trains. I swung my light toward the noise, and for a fleeting moment, I saw them. Passengers. Dozens of figures stood perfectly still on the platform, their clothes belonging to another era, their backs turned to me. Then I blinked, and they were gone. Yet the token in my pocket grew noticeably warmer. The worst part was the silence, not just quiet, absolute silence. The kind that presses against your ears, making you acutely aware of your heartbeat and the blood coursing through your veins. No distant trains, no dripping water, no hum of electricity. Cities aren't supposed to have spaces this quiet. A week later, I received something that made me stop searching altogether. In my mailbox was an envelope, yellowed with age and postmarked 1923. Inside, I found a letter written in my handwriting. The ink was fresh. Stop looking, it read. Some doors only open one way. Some stations serve different kinds of trains. If you see yourself on the platform, don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't take the token when it's offered. I already made that mistake. The letter was signed with my name. Beneath the signature, a series of those same cryptic symbols I'd seen on the token had been scrawled. The token, now tucked away in my desk drawer, has been growing steadily warmer ever since. Another detail haunts me. I'd come across a logbook during my exploration, its pages interspersed with Polaroid photos clipped to the entries. Each photo captured the same Eerie station but from impossible angles, as if the photographer had been floating or standing where no solid ground existed. One photo, dated 1994, froze me in place. It showed me in the background, wearing the exact clothes I had on that day, examining what appeared to be the same logbook. My blood ran cold. When I looked up from the photo, movement caught my eye near the doorway. A figure walking away, holding what looked like a Polaroid camera. I rushed after them, but by the time I reached the door, they were gone. Scattered on the floor were fresh Polaroids. They showed me moments earlier, reading the logbook, captured from angles that would have required the photographer to stand where solid walls existed. At some point, I stumbled upon an old payphone mounted to one of the columns. Like much else in this place, it appeared immaculate, though its design was decades out of date, straight from the 1920s. As I passed, the phone rang. The sound echoed through the station like a gunshot, sharp and piercing. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver. I knew I shouldn't answer it. I knew nothing in this place could possibly connect to the outside world, but I did. Through waves of static, I heard my own voice, older, trembling, repeating a series of numbers I recognized as dates. They stretched into the future. The final thing I heard before the line went dead was a whisper, unmistakably my own. They're not dates, they're depths. I slowly lowered the receiver, my heart pounding. Only then did I notice the phone's cord. It wasn't connected to anything. It ended abruptly, a clean cut swaying slightly in the air, as though moved by a breeze that shouldn't have been there. Near what I assumed was the station's center, I discovered a maintenance room. Unlike the vast, otherworldly expanse outside, this space felt almost normal. Cramped, dimly lit, and filled with the musty smell of age. But then I saw it, another logbook resting on the desk. Its pages spanned entries from 1923 to 2025, all written in the same distinctive handwriting. The final entry bore tomorrow's date, but it was the entry from 1978 that stopped me cold. It detailed an account of 3 maintenance workers who had stumbled into what the author referred to as the space between. They encountered something. The description violently scratched out, tearing through multiple pages. In the margins, someone had sketched a twisted map, its lines spiraled and contorted in impossible ways, converging into a central point ominously labeled the Wait. This experience changed me in ways I'm still unraveling. I became obsessed with early subway construction records, desperately searching for any mention of the Phantom Station. Interviews with dozens of transit workers yielded little, though a few went pale at the mention of Canal Street. One older worker, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette, reluctantly shared a story. In 1978, a maintenance crew vanished for 3 days. When they reappeared, they refused to talk about where they'd been. All 3 quit their jobs the very next day. The official report dismissed it as an unauthorized break, but the worker remembered their faces. "Thee saw something down there," he muttered, crushing his half-smoked cigarette into an ashtray. Something that shouldn't exist. I wandered for what felt like hours in the Phantom Station. My GPS stopped working the moment I stepped into the maintenance corridor. My phone showed no signal, and its clock remained frozen at 3:47 p.m., the exact time I'd first entered. Finally, I found the corridor that led back. I ran, panic driving my every step. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop until I burst through the service door into the familiar grime and noise of Canal Street Station. An F train was pulling in, as though nothing had happened. Since then, I've searched every inch of Canal Street Station, desperately trying to find that door again, but it's gone, as though it never existed. And sometimes, late at night, I ride the J train downtown. As it passes through Canal Street, I feel it, a pull, like the station is still there, waiting for me just beyond the edge of reality. I press my face against the train window, peering into the darkness between stations. Sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a fleeting glimpse of pristine white tiles gleaming faintly in the void, stretching away into impossible distances. But I don't look for that door anymore. Some spaces aren't meant to be explored. Some places exist in the gaps between what's real and what isn't. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't what you might find in those places. It's the chilling possibility that you might never find your way out.